Okay, great. Good afternoon. Actually, good morning still. We have patient-centered medical homes and bundled payments on one side. We have retail clinics and concierge medicine and cash-only primary care on the other. The lack of traction in the clinically integrated networks and the increased interest in retail medicine can be attributed to the increase in patient engagement. Patients Google. Patients have higher out-of-pocket expenses, copays, deductibles than ever before. And patients are increasingly addicted to technology. Their iPhones, their Apple Watches, their other home monitoring devices. I wanted to get our providers' perspective on the current state of patient engagement with some of the changes in continuity of care and also the increased interest by patients in cost and quality. Here's a short video.
So I think it depends on the market. So if you're talking about an underserved area with lack of access to care and a retail chain is able to provide some care that wasn't already there, I think there are advantages to that.
Continuity of care is really a mainstay of good medicine of any kind. Doesn't matter if it's primary care or some specialty care. There is a relationship that occurs. That's probably the most important part of what we do. I always tell folks that 90 to 95% of what I do with them is going to be communication. Because if I don't get that part right, all of the other stuff that I've dealt with really is going to be lost. Because either A, they're going to have problems with compliance. They may not follow through on it because they haven't understood what it is that I'm trying to do, maybe out of fear.
Well, those are short-term visits, I'm sure. That's not longitudinal care, first of all. Secondly, it may be good in a way because right now, so many of the family doctors refuse to see Medicare patients. They will not take new Medicare patients, and this is at least an option for them to see a physician or a nurse practitioner if they have acute needs. So I think overall it's been good. I can't tell it's affected our practice whatsoever.
I think those clinics are really great. I think that they keep people out of the ER that don't need to be in the ER. But also we tend to get a lot of primary care questions and they want us to follow things for them because they don't have the same relationship with their primary care provider. They just want to go to these quick, easy, convenient clinics.
One of the biggest problems I see in that concept is the lack of continuity that patients get. So they're not seeing the same doctor every time. You know, we've had a very strong opinion about patient-physician relationships over the years, and that is a potential problem with the doc-in-the-box concept.
Mainly, they don't look for the positive things. It seems like they always bring up the side effects of arrhythmias or, just every side effect out there. And so then I have to go into more detail and explain to them why there's so many side effects in that medication based on how the FDA does their drug trials.
Yeah, I might be the oddball out. I actually really love it when my patients look up information. I actually enjoy the fact that they look up information because it's an opportunity for me to, provide my insight. I think of it as an active patient who's actually involved in their care, and whether they have the right information or not, it is my responsibility to try to dispel or to try to build on that education that they've already accumulated over time. So I'm a huge proponent of education. I tell my patients often to look up material online. I guide them to different resources, and I don't think I've ever looked at somebody and thought that was a negative component of their care.
it's very beneficial to the patients. I think it empowers patients. The more knowledge they have, the better decisions they can make. It helps us to practice. It helps us to make decisions with the patients, and I think it's the more they know, the better.
Patients are now more aware of their care, what is out there, what therapies are being used, up to date, current guidelines, and so the physician has to really take a little bit more time, but efficient time, to make sure that patient does understand what we are doing, which tests we are ordering, what is the disease process. So the days that the patient comes and says, "Doc, you know it, and you do whatever you think is the best," is gone.
Probably I'm having more of the younger to middle-aged generation with these wearables, and I find it to be quite helpful because they can tell me when they're having spikes, as far as if they are normally in a heart rate range approximately 60 to 80, but then they say, well, this day I hopped up to 110. We can talk about that day and what their symptoms were, because they remember it because they've been watching it. And they can tell me if they're having palpitations or shortness of breath, and we can go from there. And so it also tells me how often those things are happening. And then if we need to further investigate that, then it's been helpful.
And you would think that would just be our younger population, but no, we've had 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds that come in and say, hey, look how many steps I've taken in a day. I had a patient the other day that came in her 30s, and she had a water bottle that would send information to her iPhone saying how much that water she's drank that day, which is pretty impressive. And then they come in all the time telling me about different apps. We had a young man in here the other day told me about an app called Berrytastic. It tracks his steps, it tracks his calories, and just checks his overall BMI daily, so he can just keep up with it that way, which is really neat.
There has to be some way that the patient is helping the healthcare economy, or has a stake in helping the healthcare economy, helping us help them.
Can you imagine a national system like this? I mean, that everything is there. Not only that, gives you access to the patient, you know all about the patient, but at the same time, it tells you about medical economics.
Physicians are looking for different roles right now because they're trying to get away from a lot of the onerous things that come with having to buy into electronic medical records, having to work with insurance. I went to school with a lot of people who have gone into primary care, and they are moving specifically into cash-only retail type of environments, and they're seeing a lot of the advantages of it. Now, there's probably the devil's in the detail on that, and it's still pretty early for most of them because they've been practicing in more traditional formats for 20 years or so now, and this has been kind of their big next frontier probably over the last couple of years.
I think they more take quality of care into consideration. If you have the cash to pay for it, I don't think $1,000 here, $1,000 really going to make the change. This is a lifelong procedure. You're not going to take a surgery lightly.
I wish I knew the answer to that. I think we must have access to medical care for everybody if possible. And ideally, everybody ought to have some sort of insurance coverage. I don't know whether that's going to come to that or not. The current administration and Congress can't seem to agree on anything. My hope is they won't take away what we have so far without putting something better in place, which may not happen.
I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Hey, hey. Well, I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Hey, hey. Said I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. And if I share with you my story, would you share your dollar with me? Bad times are coming and I reap what I done sowed. Hey, hey. Well, let me tell you something, all that glitters ain't gold. Hey, hey. It's been a long old troublesome road, and I'm looking for somebody come and help me carry this load. I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Hey, hey. Well, I need a dollar, 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 that's what I need. Well, I don't know if I'm walking on solid ground, 'cause everything around me is falling down. And all I want is for someone to help me. I had a job, but the boss man let me go. He said, I'm sorry, but I won't be.
We know that cost isn't low enough. We know that quality is high, but can be higher. And we also know that access at times can still be questionable. Retail medicine is hard for us. Unfortunately, we, the hospitals and providers, have continued to receive cuts to reimbursement and been subjected to mandated reporting that costs a significant amount of resources and money. In the meantime, shareholders of medical device manufacturers, payers, and drug companies continue to receive beautiful increasing dividends and returns. I read an article on Tuesday that reported a pharma CEO in his annual compensation of $863 million. And we wonder why our patients can't afford their drugs. A little bit closer to home, also reported in that article, was a TAVR valve company CEO and his annual compensation of $246 million. For every $1 in revenue that TAVR company generates, 2 cents goes to CEO compensation, or $650 for every TAVR. There will come a day when we will all realize that hospitals without a margin won't have a mission. We aren't sustainable in a retail environment in which all parties don't come to the table to deal with cost containment. And data is still relatively unknown to the patients. Payers use data to drive savings back to shareholders with the penalties and clawbacks taken from providers. And all of this is past the point of a remedy or quality outcome for the patient. Shouldn't data be utilized in a proactive and predictive manner to improve the opportunity for patients to have better outcomes, which are higher quality and lower cost? And the sources of most of the data, obviously, are the electronic health records. They're disparate in many, and they don't give patients easy, instant access with predictions of health consequences. And they seldom interact effectively with diagnostics in the home and sometimes even in the hospitals and the clinics. Would it be better to have a digital wallet where the patient carried with them all of their data? What about a microchip under the skin to house a patient's medical record as opposed to centralized repositories? You know, funny enough, patient engagement might mean putting the patient's information into the hands of the patient in the retail environment, not the payers or the government. I'm going to close on this. Our patients are so much more engaged in the process. We must figure out a way to make that engagement more meaningful and bring about lower cost and higher quality. The conversations, the debates, the tweets, they're going to continue, but there's no doubt that our healthcare industry is changing more rapidly than ever before by a lot of folks that don't have any healthcare experience. We have to help steer that change. Thank you.